For 8 hours on July 13th, 1985, President Ronald Reagan handed the powers of the presidency to his vice president, George Bush. What led to this astonishing, though temporary, transfer of power? I'm Bob Summers, and this is a presidential story. Technically, this started 144 years earlier with the sudden death of President William Henry Harrison in 1841. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 6 of the U.S. Constitution states that the powers and duties of the presidency devolve to the vice president in the event of the president's removal, death, resignation, or inability. However, it is not clear in the text if the vice president becomes the president or if they are the acting president. It also does not specify the mechanism for that transfer of power. So when President Harrison died, Vice President John Tyler was in uncharted waters. Congress was questioning which powers Tyler had and what he should be called: president, acting president, or still the vice president. Some just resorted to calling him His Excellency. Tyler insisted he was the president, had a judge administer the presidential oath of office, and then continued to fight off anyone who treated him as anything less than the legitimate president, and thus began the precedent of the vice president becoming the president after their death, which has happened a total of 8 times. There were also a couple of other constitutional issues that had come up. First, when there was no vice president, like after John Tyler became president, there was no mechanism to replace him, leaving the office vacant. This also happened when the vice president died or resigned. Along with the presidential ascension of vice presidents, the vice president's office has been vacant for about 1/5 of the country's history. The second issue is around when the president cannot discharge their duties, like for the 80 days President Garfield lay dying after being shot, or after President Wilson suffered a massive stroke. So in the 1950s, during the Cold War, and with President Dwight Eisenhower having heart health issues, there were conversations about a constitutional amendment to address these issues. No movement was made until it came up again in 1963 after the assassination of President John Kennedy. Kennedy's vice president and now president Lyndon Johnson also had known heart health issues, and now he also had no vice president. The next 2 people in line for the presidency were 71-year-old Speaker of the House John McCormack and 86-year-old Senate Pro Tem Carl Hayden. It wasn't until July 1965 when the text of this constitutional amendment was approved by Congress and went to the states for ratification. Nebraska was the first to ratify, and on February 10, 1967, Minnesota and Nevada became the 37th and 38th states to ratify the 25th Amendment, which now codified the process for a vice president to become president, the replacement of a vice presidential vacancy, and the process when a president is incapable of discharging their duties. The reason this background is important is because of Section 3 of the amendment. Whenever the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the vice president as acting president. This provision has never been used before 1985. On July 12th of that year, President Reagan underwent a routine colonoscopy and was diagnosed with bowel cancer. Reagan elected to have the lesion removed immediately. Reagan consulted with White House counsel Fred Fielding and Chief of Staff Donald Regan if he should invoke Section 3. They recommended he should, but Reagan was concerned of the precedent it would set. Reagan ended up sending a letter that basically said he was not invoking Section 3, but that Bush would be acting president. He then delivered the letter to the Speaker of the House and the Senate pro tem. Historians argue that since there is no other mechanism to make Bush the acting president, and since Reagan followed the steps outlined in Section 3, that he had in fact invoked that clause. In his memoir, Reagan agreed with this interpretation and stated that he had invoked the 25th Amendment. When Reagan went under general anesthesia at 11:28 on the morning of July 13th, George Bush became the nation's first acting president, until Reagan signed another letter at 7:22 p.m. saying he could resume his duties. So what did Bush do during those 8 hours? Nothing. Well, he played quite a bit of tennis, but he did not use any of the constitutional powers of the presidency. Reagan's surgery was a success. A 2-inch cancerous polyp was removed from his large intestine. They also removed 2 feet of Reagan's lower intestine. After a week recovering in the hospital, Reagan returned to the White House. Reagan's letter did set a precedent. Since 1985, Section 3 has been invoked 3 other times. President George W. Bush had routine colonoscopies in 2002 and 2007, making Vice President Dick Cheney acting president for a little more than 2 hours each time. And President Joe Biden had a colonoscopy in 2021, making Vice President Kamala Harris acting president for 1 hour and 25 minutes. Of the 4 sections of the 25th Amendment, only one has never been invoked, Section 4. It's a major plot point in Harrison Ford's 1997 movie, Air Force One. So check it out if you haven't seen it. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please help out the channel, like and subscribe. And please visit POTUS.com to learn more interesting facts about the presidents.